Vitrio Financial is proud to support Improving Alpha, Innovation in Investing, ESG and Technology with Michael Oliver Weinberg. Vitrio helps allocators harness investment complexity to make better allocation decisions. Learn more at vidrio.com. That's vidrio.com.
Hi, this is Michael Oliver Weinberg. We'd like to welcome everyone to the Improving Alpha Innovation in Investing, ESG, and Technology podcast series. Today, Jonathan Grabel is kind enough to join us from LACERA, where he's Chief Investment Officer. So listeners have a high-level sense as to our roadmap for today. We'll start with some background color, then discuss how LACERA is improving alpha, touch on the opportunity set in today's markets, and finish with some advice. On that note, welcome, Jonathan.
Hi, Michael. It is fantastic to be here with you. I'm excited about our conversation.
Cool. Thank you. Look, if you could start by very briefly sharing with us your background, that would be great.
Sure. Thank you once again, Michael. My background started, after college. I worked in public accounting. I worked for one of at the time, the big six public accounting firms, and many of my original clients were private equity firms. I didn't know much about private equity at the time, and I thought what they did was very interesting. So I tried to get a job with one of them, couldn't, so I went back to business school. And then after business school, I worked in debt merchant banking, which led to an introduction and a relationship with a private equity firm based in New York that did growth stage, late stage venture, private equity in the digital communication space, specifically service application and equipment companies that touch a digital network. Was there for 13 years or so, was a partner of the firm, loved what I did, but really decided that I want to do something different. And I started on what is a fantastic journey, the happiest I've ever been professionally, working as a public pension plan CIO. I worked in Maryland, New Mexico, and here in Los Angeles County, and think that I'm quite fortunate to have the best job in the world.
That's great. So maybe it's a good segue to, just sharing with listeners a bit what LACERA is, a little bit more about it, and then contextualize that with your current role and the objective of the fund, if that's not too much at once.
Sure. LACERA, and LACERA stands for the Los Angeles County Employees Retirement Association. We oversee two pools of capital. One is a traditional defined benefit plan for it's close to 190,000 active and retired members, employees who serve Los Angeles County in all different aspects of public employment, and that pool is about $70 billion, just over $70 billion. The markets, and we can certainly discuss this in a little bit, have been volatile, challenging. So at our peak, we were closer to 75 billion. When I started 5 years ago, we were in the 40s. So the plan has grown nicely. And then the second pool of capital that we oversee here is a retiree healthcare trust, which provides retirement healthcare benefits. And Los Angeles County Employees Retirement Association, we are governed by two boards. One board that oversees the retirement operations of the organization, and then a dedicated board of investments.
Got it. That's a helpful overview. Let's shift gears now to the primary goal of this podcast series, which is, to discuss innovation and improving alpha. Let's start with from an investment perspective. I mean, it's obviously not easy, but maybe if you could share a little bit of insight how you're innovating to improve alpha from an investment perspective.
Maybe the most important thing about innovation is starting with first principles, and in some sense keeping it simple. And our mission is to provide, retirement benefits today, tomorrow, into the future. And we do that through a combination of, we have employer contributions, employee contributions, and investment earnings. We are a mature pension, which means that benefit payments exceed contributions, which means what we do is very hard. It means that in a environment where markets are challenged, our obligations don't get smaller. Our duty to our members doesn't diminish. In some sense, our job gets harder. So we provide about $4 billion a year in benefit payments, contributions, once again, from employees and the employers, about $3 billion a year. And the way that we accomplish this very important mission to pay retirement benefits is, it all starts with our strategic asset allocation. And maybe what underlies that is, a very methodical process to apportion assets, in accordance with the return and risk expectations of the board. We do that in accordance with a set of investment beliefs. And one of those investment beliefs, going back to strategic asset allocation, is that is the principal determinant of outcomes for us. So going back to the question of how we navigate through markets, maybe the most important way we navigate through markets is, through strategic asset allocation, by dividing the portfolio between stocks, bonds, real estate, public markets, private markets, US markets, international markets. And what we've done, maybe over the last 5 years or so, is we've done a lot with that strategic asset allocation. We've consolidated asset categories. We had 8 asset categories. Now we have 4 main asset categories, and those are growth, credit, real assets, and risk reduction. And growth, for example, combines public and private equity as well as non-core real estate. So rather than saying US public equity, international public equity, private equity, or 3 different asset categories, we view them as one. And because they have common characteristics, which is growth, and within that growth portfolio, we structure our portfolio to really identify the best implementation to get that growth at with the least risk and the lowest cost where possible.
When we talk about ESG, obviously it's become rather polarized in the US for better or for worse, probably for worse. Many pensions in the US don't have ESG as part of their fiduciary duty. The Dutch pension I was at recently did have it as embedded in its fiduciary duty. So in some respects that makes it easier, in others it makes it harder. Where does LACERA stand on that?
Environmental, social, governance factors are critical to every investment that we make. We have, and we have been discussing at LACERA before I got here, but before the letters E, S, and G stood for, for stewardship or environmental, social, and governance. It's a long-standing tradition at LACERA. We are, are an early part of the Council of Institutional Investors. We're an early signatory to the UN PRI, just as a couple of examples. As we have on the team here, we have a dedicated principal investment officer who reports to me as the CIO, who oversees our governance work, our stewardship work. And I think that we have a rather elegant way of approaching ESG. We view environmental, social, and governance factors as critical information that can either enhance returns and or mitigate risks, and they may vary by geography, by investment, by industry, but nonetheless, ESG considerations are a process that is part of every investment. Every new investment has an analysis of ESG considerations. We have a manager scorecard for all our existing relationships, and one of the 5 scores that we give our business partners, that's qualitative and quantitative and qualitative, is an ESG score. So we view it as fundamentally a process as opposed to a product. I think that some of the issues that you may be talking about may be productized ESG, where a common definition is applied to all. At LACERA, we're focused on having information that is right for us, right for our board, right for optimizing our fiduciary duty to our members. And I think in some sense, when I started investing, it was maybe the investment world was more two-dimensional. You looked at return prospects and risk narrowly defined as volatility. I think maybe we're investing in more of a three-dimensional space where there are other factors that are relevant and can make you a better investor and provide you with more information. And I don't understand why any investor would choose less information. ESG, factors just give you more information. What you do with it may vary by plan, but any day of the week and twice on Tuesdays, I want more information.
Yeah, I don't disagree. I think, just to play devil's advocate here, I guess one of the issues may be, for example, rating scores. You have the same company, 2 different agencies have completely antithetical scores, right? And how subjective are they versus how objective, and how meaningful are they? So just curious to hear your thoughts on that.
And that's the benefit of having a dedicated team focused on stewardship. We've done a lot. I know this is part of what your focus is on, that intersection between technology and ESG. We've done a lot across the portfolio in upgrading how we embrace technology, data. We look at everything from a total fund perspective, as well as underlying sleeves, as well as underlying investments. And part of that is having various sources of ESG information, ratings, and so it provides insight into what we do. I don't think that there's any one view that may be definitive, but that is where, from a LACERA perspective, maybe the most important resource we have to get the best outcomes of our financial capital is human capital. And having, what I believe is superior human capital allows us to really evaluate that data and use it in the way that's net additive to LACERA. And a couple of examples that may be helpful in terms of what we've done. I've mentioned our, for every new investment, we assign an ESG. We do an ESG analysis we have a rating that we have in our manager scorecard, but we also elevated our strategic asset allocation in, I think 2020 was the last time we updated our strategic asset allocation or started the process. And we sensitized our capital market assumptions to include, to make them climate aware, where we adjusted return expectations, changed the volatility such that our analysis was more climate aware. So I think that there's information out there, and then how you make that information, your information, I think is how we're trying to elevate our program here.
And do you have a view on exclusion versus engagement? I'm a huge proponent of engagement, not really big on exclusion personally, but curious if you have a view.
Our philosophy is engagement. And one example of that is 5 years ago or so, we only voted about 10% of our proxies. That the balance were outsourced to our business partners. Over the last 5 years, we've insourced it, so we've flipped those numbers around. We now vote over 90% of our global proxies ourselves based upon our own proprietary rules. And implicit in that is the premise of engagement. We publish our proxy trends on our website. We have a dedicated, and this may go back to how we view ESG, but we have a dedicated board committee on governance in addition to dedicated staff, which I think also elevates our discussion, or maybe that's for staff to elevate its discussion. We publish a annual stewardship report, which talks about many of the ways we engage various companies, how we amplify our voice with peer plans, peer institutional investors, as well as working with organizations such as SASB, and organizations such as that to really try to come up with standards and raise the total discourse.
That sounds great. Yeah, that sounds like it's right on track. And then anything you want to add from a technology perspective? You sort of touched on it a few times in terms of the scorecard and the strategic asset allocation, but anything you want to add from an innovation and improving alpha perspective?
We've upped our game significantly, and once again, that's based upon being pushed by the board and having the right talent here. We have moved from having a monthly close to now we have a daily NAV of the portfolio, and I think that has done a tremendous amount to help us better rebalance the portfolio. We've implemented a cash overlay, which helps us rebalance on a daily basis to use excess cash to the most underweight asset category. We also use the cash overlay to take away in our global equity book overweights to different geographies and market capitalizations. So that's an application of technology. But much like we have a dedicated stewardship team, we have a dedicated portfolio analytics team, which works with all of our discrete asset categories to provide better data to the team that's underwriting investments, to the board when we provide information to them. And I think one of the great examples of how we're really capturing all this data is we have once a quarter a quarterly performance review driven by the staff, where we look at the entirety of the portfolio, starting with the total fund level, looking at our risk exposures, looking at our carbon footprint, for example, and then we go through our functional categories such as growth that I mentioned before.
Yep.
And then each team presents key observations from the prior quarter. You don't really want that recency bias, but from the prior quarter, based upon the more granular data we now have of the portfolio. And I think one way that it's helped us is, when we make a private equity commitment, for example, that obviously is a blind pool. But having better technology enables us to identify, what our total exposure is to an industry, a geography, and it makes the decisions that are made that much more intentional. And the greater the intentionality, going back to our ultimate mission to our members, I think that leads to better processes, which I believe leads to better outcomes.
All right, let's get a little more granular. And anything super interesting on the investment side now? Or what's the if not the best, a super interesting where either you're increasing your strategic or tactical asset allocation to, or you see the market dislocation to have created a material opportunity?
Yeah, I'll answer it in two ways. First, I would say is more kind of an implementation through that type of lens is and this is consistent with our strategic plan, which is called Allocator to Best in Class Investor. And one of the dimensions of that plan relates to our business model. And we've been doing much more in terms of co-investment. We've brought that in-house. This year, it's in front of the board next month. I think our recommendation is about 30% or so of our annual private equity commitment will be for co-investments and secondaries. And since we brought that in-house in 2019 or so, our co-investment program has outperformed our private equity book as a whole by about 2,000 basis points. So, and it's on a meaningful amount of capital. So I would say that from an implementation perspective, and this goes back to our discussion about intentionality, we're that much more intentional. And I think that thus far, now it's early, but I think thus far it's paying dividends for our members. And we've expanded co-investments from private equity. We recently made 2 co-investments in real assets. We just did over the last year our first secondary investment in agriculture. There's nothing better than being a provider of capital when there are motivated sellers. I think that's one of the benefit to, once again, going back to technology, to the extent you have better insight into your portfolio, you better understand cash positions and liquidity profiles, you can be a provider of capital, and fundamentally that's good investing. The second aspect are some exciting tech sectors. We've seen a lot recently in energy transition. Now there's a lot talking about of maybe overhype, but fundamentally there's some tremendous opportunity, and I'll highlight one area, which is for the energy transition. There's a critical need for key resources, for key minerals, and we have made a recent commitment in that area, which is quite attractive. We've also, another area, we have a new emerging manager program in illiquid credit. We just made a commitment to a music royalty manager, which is a really interesting opportunity. So those are some of the areas. I think that there are other areas, once again, in terms of in a challenging market environment, we're trying to, maybe not play small ball, but to make sure that we reduce inefficiencies. One of those is that I think we're structuring investments better than ever. We're doing more through separate accounts. Where we get better fee terms, lower fees, and we're also, through our emerging manager program, we've helped seed some firms, and we have some rev share relationships with those firms. So I think that's on the more innovative side, and things where we can identify return streams that heretofore we haven't.
Yeah, that a lot of that sounds great. Rare earth materials, seeding, something I've been doing for almost 20 years. Yeah, it's certainly become a lot more balkanized now with and asset owners like yourself doing seeding, whereas 20 years ago there were a handful of firms that were primarily seeding. Very sensible though. It's a great revenue stream to add on top of the funds return stream. But look, we could talk about those investments in yours for hours, but we're going to sort of keep it to a brief time. So let's talk about what challenges do you face in terms of achieving your goals and generating the returns for the beneficiaries and investing and implementing this strategic asset allocation?
The challenges. I think that the challenges are, turning on the news and just seeing the environment that we're in, where maybe it's a lower growth, higher inflationary environment, with a rising cost of capital, I think there are very few investors who have invested with that paradigm. It's a shifting, or maybe shifted, paradigm, and most of us have invested, over the last 40 years with declining cost of capital, and that makes investing much easier. So I would say part of the challenge is a people challenge, given lack of experience, or maybe overconfidence based upon the factors that led to prior success may be less relevant. Yeah. And then the other is the interplay between asset categories. To the extent financing is that much more expensive, that impacts many private asset categories. So I think that's a challenge. And there also maybe the challenge just relates to fund flows, to the extent, LACERA, our threshold return is 7%, and you could look in the Bloomberg and see that the 2-year Treasury is at that 7% nominal, and then you see on the Bloomberg that the U.S. 2-year is at 4.5%. Well, I think that may shift, not just at LACERA, but across portfolios, the apportionment between risky and less risky assets, safer assets, and more complex assets. And maybe there, in some sense, will be this desire to, embrace complexity, and maybe some pushes not to embrace complexity. And once again, recognizing time limits, I would say that one other area of complexity or challenge relates are geographic, in the sense that we've been investing for 75 plus years in an increasingly global economy, increasingly global capital markets, and I think that there's greater friction to the flow of capital. So I think that is the implications, may not be known.
I completely agree. What's a red flag with a manager such that you wouldn't invest?
What's a red flag? I would say that a red flag is too much confidence. I think that there needs to be humility. We believe in teams. I think that when you talk to a prospective business partner and everything is single threaded through one person, that's a red flag. And I think that part of that touches on the importance of diversity, equity, inclusion, that fundamentally diverse, inclusive, equitable teams outperform. So I think that our analysis of DEI considerations, which is under the banner of LACERA Tide, I think that would probably flag some of those concerns. I think that is really a big concern for us, is kind of a team that's an individual. We really believe in backing teams with multiple forms of redundancy, and teams that avoid groupthink.
Understood. Yeah. So hubris and one-man bands effectively, or one woman or one person bands, avoid them. Got it. Sensible. And then what's a material mistake you've made investing, and a lesson learned? Always a tough
material one. Mistake. I don't want to.
Or a lesson learned.
Identify, even though it's really important to acknowledge mistakes. I think that mistakes are an opportunity to grow and learn. I think making the same mistake twice that's the mistake. I would say that I learned a lot throughout my career by trying to be a prudent consumer of people that were positive and negative mentors, so to speak, where I look to embrace everything that challenged me, that taught me, and try to disregard things that diminished me or didn't really inspire me to be my best. So I would say that maybe the most critical lesson I learned throughout my career, from maybe having witnessed mistakes, is the importance of teaching, being a mentor, and empowering those around you to really optimize outcomes for themselves, and that optimizes outcomes, as fiduciary, optimize outcomes for themselves as fiduciaries, but that positions them and us as an organization to really win for our members.
I think that's sensible. Do you have a favorite book or a book you've read recently that you'd recommend to our listeners?
Oh, I just read, I try to read a lot, and the secret to reading a lot is putting stuff down that's not working. And so I try to rotate between kind of bad fiction and nonfiction. I'm a big fan of reading history, both historical fiction as well as biographies. But I just read The End of the World is Just the Beginning, and I thought that was an interesting read.
Someone else just recommended that to me last week, and as well as the other books by that author.
Yeah.
So I have them on my list as well. All right, but since we're running out of time, what advice do you have for other allocators and or investors, aside from the mentorship that you discussed a few minutes ago in sort of lessons learned?
Yeah, I think it's just be humble. I think to the extent that anybody that professes, investing fundamentally is about a future state. None of us that I know of are clairvoyant and can accurately, consistently predict that future state. So acknowledge that as an investor, and be humble, be open to a variety of viewpoints, and seek as much input as possible. Focus on process, and I think that leads to the best outcomes.
Yeah, and that ties into your earlier statements on not being hubristic. And when I was a portfolio manager at Soros for George Soros, one of his premises was always infallibility, that he's not infallible, and that he would always, take in new information. And if the new information proved him wrong, then he would change his investment accordingly on the drop of a dime, effectively. And I think that's quite sensible.
Better said than how I said it.
Yeah, kind of you, but more than one way is to achieve the same goal. Anyway, lastly, that's what you said, though, was also a good segue into my last question, which is, what didn't we discuss that I should have asked you, or you're discussing with other investors? Anything we missed here, or that you'd like to share? Or
this is a great discussion. As I started out, I absolutely love what I do, and what I love, and this may go back to the question about advice for other allocators, is every day should be different. You should build upon that from the knowledge from the prior day, but every day should be different and should be the best yet. So in terms of what we haven't discussed, I think that we've talked about a lot, and I think that we've hit on a lot of high points that embrace the low points, that it's such a challenging environment. But I think, and maybe this is my sales pitch for anyone that's looking to work in public pensions, is work in public pensions. It's a great opportunity.
Nice. All right. On that cheerful note, look, thanks for the superbly interesting discussion, sharing your most valuable asset with us, your time. And we hope listeners have a better appreciation of how one of the world's most sophisticated asset owners is innovating in investing ESG and technology. This is your host, Michael Oliver Weinberg, hoping you join us again for our next episode, where I'll speak with another thought leader who will provide insight into improving alpha via innovation. Until then, stay well, and thank you.
Thank you for listening to Improving Alpha, Innovation in Investing, ESG and Technology, sponsored by Vidrio Financial. With Vidrio Financial, asset managers, endowments and foundations, pensions, family offices, insurance plans and sovereign wealth funds can cut through the complexity of asset allocation to reduce costs, mitigate portfolio risk, optimize compliance controls, and improve performance analytics. Interested to learn more? Contact us today at vidrio.com. That's vidrio.com. The information covered and posted represents the views and opinions of the guest and does not necessarily represent the views or opinions of Vidrio Financial and/or our host, Michael Oliver Weinberg. The content has been made available for informational and educational purposes only. The content is not intended to be a substitute for professional investing advice. Always seek the advice of your financial advisor or other qualified financial service provider with any questions you may have regarding investment planning.